Lee holds up a device.
This is a spirometer. It's a tool to measure your lung capacity and function. Medical tools like this one are built with an adjustment, and it adjusts for race, or as they call it in this particular setting, origin. So I'm gonna check African American, and then we'll try it again, and I'll change my origin in this case. And we'll see what happens when I blow into it. Race adjustments, or race norms, are used all over medicine, from assessing kidney function to determining breast cancer risk and even diagnosing people with dementia. The purpose is to make more accurate predictions about people's health. But a recent lawsuit from retired NFL players accusing the practice of being discriminatory has brought national media attention to the potential harms of using race norming in medicine.
The practice, widely known as race norming, makes it harder for black players to qualify for compensation.
It establishes a lower cognitive baseline for blacks than for whites.
Basically, you were dumb before you started playing.
I need to learn more about why these adjustments are being used. Are there actual genetic differences between races? Where did the idea of race even come from? Let's see what it does.
Lee blows into the tube of the plastic handheld device. Words appear on a light board. How should doctors consider race? White titles are sketched in. Glad you asked, Season 2. Lee, a black guy in his 20s, looks at his results.
So these are my results. FEV stands for forced expiratory volume. It's the amount of breath that you can release in 1 second. 95%, FEV 3.6. I'm a specimen of athletic achievement. So compared to other black men, like me, basically, my lung functioning, rather, is pretty healthy. So we're gonna do it one more time, and this time we're gonna change my origin to white.
He blows into the device.
So I'm considered mildly abnormal right now. My numbers, my FEV is a 76th percentile. If this was black, it would have been 96th percentile. I went from being very healthy to lightly abnormal, and I'm curious if this dramatic adjustment from white to black could be the reason why someone might be misdiagnosed just because of their skin color.
With Christoph and Joss.
So you guys have heard the saying that race is a social construct, and I feel like for the most part, we all believe that. There's a 2018 survey that said 1 in 3 Americans actually believes there's a biological difference between the races. And that's kind of what I'm trying to investigate right now. So I need you guys to do one thing for me. Stand in front of this projector, and I'm gonna try to capture your silhouette.
Okay.
Christoph and Joss stand behind a screen.
Strike a pose.
They are silhouetted.
Ooh.
Amazing.
Oh.
So you guys are both humans. Everyone has between 20 and 25,000 genes, most of which 99.9% are the same. It's that 0.1% that makes us all individual or unique. That 0.1% represents mutations to your genetic code, which become genetic variants. And those genetic variants can be anything from physical things like skin color, hair color, eye color. But what I'm here to talk about today is one very specific genetic variant, and that's skin color. All right. So there are a few gene variants that are related to skin tone and pigment, right? They're actually what determine melanin production in the body, and melanin is what makes skin darker. And we know that there's a correlation between exposure to the sun and melanin.
The world map.
So dark skin helps protect against the harmful effects of ultraviolet light. And the closer folks were to the equator, their skin remained darker. And as we started to kind of spread out across the globe, lighter skin evolved. Light skin helps with the production of vitamin D in the body.
At that latitudes, they're less worried about getting too much sun and more worried about
Getting enough, right?
Yeah, when you mentioned the survey of whether people think race is biological, I think basically this is what they're thinking about. You know,
Right.
They see people having different skin colors, some of their different features, and they're like, I can see a difference.
And as you can see, Africa has tons of diversity in skin color.
Yeah, so when people try to define a race category, clearly they can't use skin color.
It's kind of laughable, honestly.
So like, I mean, this map captures skin color, but it does not account for other physical mutations that happened over time.
I think when you would look at those as well, you would find that they don't map on to these continents so clearly. I think that if you try to find physical characteristics of the racial categories, you're going to fail every time.
In the last 500 years, there's been even more movement of humans across the globe. And a lot of that was due to the forced migration, the transatlantic slave trade. And with this increased exposure and mixture of skin colors, inferences were starting to be made about what someone's skin color meant about them. The idea that there was a difference between races and skin tones, people started to come to some pretty wild conclusions. I want to show you guys what I mean when I say that.
An etching of a black slave named John Brown.
So this is John Brown. A man named Dr. Hamilton was performing tests, experiments on John's skin to prove that black people had thicker skin than white people. Their skin was better able to tolerate working outside in the sun, and he would do things like expose John's skin to extremely dangerous levels of direct sunlight. And he did this for years to try and justify this belief that blacks were meant to be slaves biologically. But this belief of skin thickness, it lingered through medicine to today, and it's being taught to kids in medical school right now.
So I'm a second-year medical student right now. My roommate reminded me of a time when he was in a suture clinic practicing his suturing skills on a banana. He asked the question of, how do you know what needle size to use, and how do you know what thread size to use? The physician said it correlates with the thickness of the skin. So for example, the skin in your eyelid is much thinner than the skin in your lower back. But then they said that needle size can also correlate with a person's ethnicity, implying that different skin colors have different thicknesses of skin, which isn't true. That's literally how racism is perpetuated in the field of medicine.
I would imagine we see similar misconceptions around pain tolerance too, right? I mean,
Exactly.
I feel like that goes hand in hand with skin thickness.
The belief that one skin color or one person of one race is superior to another, that is racism. But that's not really what I'm trying to investigate. What I'm trying to investigate is what role race plays in medicine.
It seems like a really tough question because you're talking about going like more than skin deep and asking whether there are biological differences in the way that our health develops and the kind of conditions that we might be at risk for.
I'm a carrier of the sickle cell anemia trait.
Oh, right.
For years, we thought that was a black disease,
That's
right?
what people think of it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Because it's so prevalent among this one kind of group of the world and less prevalent everywhere else, we label that with a kind of racial category.
Yeah, this idea that there are diseases, right, or like medical issues tied to a specific race, it's wild.
With Dr. Esteban Burchard.
When we go to the doctor and we check a box for race, what is that information actually being used for?
You're being compared to an average distribution of healthy individuals of your sex, your age, and your race.
Why is it being utilized?
We know that blood characteristics, like your red blood cells, your white blood cells, differ by race. And so when I'm telling you your white blood cell count is X number, 100, what does that 100 mean? It only means something if you're being compared to a population average. So I had a patient, a firefighter, and when we were doing the test on his lungs, the technician immediately compared him to African Americans. But I asked him what he was, and he said, I'm half. And in his case, it benefited him to be labeled white, so he qualified for disability benefits.
How much do social determinants affect health outcomes? Things like housing, things like exposure to air pollution, socioeconomic status, all those things.
I think your zip code, for non-biologic reasons, is a bigger predictor of health and health inequities than anything.
Shouldn't those factors then be included in conjunction with things like race and age and gender?
So that's what we call an empiric question. We don't know the answer yet. Until we do the studies, we can't definitively say if X disease is due to social, environmental factors or purely biology.
Do you think this race stratification in medicine could potentially overstate how much of a biological difference there is between members of different races?
We could be either overestimating your disease or underestimating your disease. And I can't give you a blanket statement. We need to do the work to actually determine what is the normal population distribution for different racial groups.
Lee closes his laptop.
So it makes sense that you would want to be compared to a population that's similar to you, but should skin color be a part of that? I've been looking online for studies or situations where race norming has caused harm, But if you were misdiagnosed because of this, it would be hard to quantify, mostly because patients wouldn't be aware that these adjustments were being used. It's more about the potential harm if doctors start to rely on metrics that have no biological basis. And it seems like it's an area that's only beginning to be studied. I have found one recent case of the consequences of race norming. It actually concerns the NFL.
Lee walks through an airport waiting room. Sitting on the seat of a passenger plane, he straps a belt on. Next, he drives a car under a sunny sky.
So these race adjustments were used in the neurological assessments of these former NFL athletes. I'm getting ready to meet Kevin Henry. He spent 8 seasons playing defensive end in the NFL, and he took out a lawsuit against the NFL specifically because of this race norming.
Kevin shows Lee his football helmet.
See them divots in there?
I see that. There's a lot of scratches in it. What does 8 seasons in the NFL do to someone? Physically, mentally, emotionally?
My 8-year career was full of injuries, full of things I had to fight through. Both ankles, one of them twice, both knees, both elbows, both wrists. All my fingers been broke at least once, both shoulders. I've had 10 or more concussions. And those are just the ones that are documented.
I've talked to a couple other guys who said they would be kind of in a fog normally.
Right. It takes you just a little bit longer to make decisions.
What was it like watching Kevin go through this for 8 seasons?
It was horrible. You know, he sits there, this is hurting, my head is hurting. Like, the memories, like, I'm the person that has to make sure, you know, the doors are locked. The oven's turned off.
I don't care how much money you have, what kind of shape you're in, you can't do anything without that brain, man.
Initially, what was your diagnosis and what did the NFL say?
They did not deny me altogether. And then I kept going back, you know, getting reevaluated.
His lawyer, you know, did the research. He was like, something's not right.
From what I read, it seemed like they were saying that you entered the league at a lower level of cognitive functioning than your white counterparts,
right,
which meant that you needed to show even more severe cognitive decline.
Basically, you were dumb before you started playing.
Oh my God.
So if you're claiming that you're impaired now.
He was already impaired.
Kevin was recently reevaluated and diagnosed with mild impairment, which can lead to some treatment and monitoring, but no money. His lawyer claims that without race norming, his scores would have shown more severe impairment and could have qualified him for a monetary reward. What drove you to file the lawsuit initially?
I wanted this whole race norming thing eradicated. It allows them to have an escape hatch to me for the payments.
What would that, that compensation mean to your life?
So I'm in a situation right now whereas who's gonna hire me? I've been diagnosed with dementia. How can I find a job? I still have a mortgage. I still got a family to take care of, to support. I don't like talking about suicide. With everything that I got going on, man, I'm battling depression.
Like, I just see this man deteriorating every single day, and it just breaks my heart.
It extends beyond just, I need, help to pay my mortgage. You need help to manage your life.
Right. At least give us some tools to work with. You know what I mean?
The judge dismissed Kevin's lawsuit, but ordered the NFL and the original settlement lawyers to address the race norming issue. An NFL spokesperson told me the availability of demographic adjustments was designed to avoid the misdiagnosis of healthy individuals as cognitively impaired. The NFL, nevertheless, is committed to helping find alternative testing techniques that will lead to diagnostic accuracy without employing race-based norms.
Lee leaves Kevin's house. An SUV drives along a freeway. An airport under bright dusk light. Lee is back in his New York apartment. He adjusts a camera on his desk and addresses it.
The thing is, the more I hear about this, the more I feel like race is not a reliable category for measuring health differences. And I keep thinking about something that Dr. Bouchard told me when we last spoke.
Race and ethnicity are social constructs. They're artificial social constructs, and it's different than genetic ancestry.
So if genetic ancestry matters more than race, I'm gonna go learn a bit more about mine.
Lee is with Christoph and Joss.
We've talked about how race can be a pretty crude metric for skin tone. The thing is, race does correlate with certain genetic traits. I carry the sickle cell anemia trait. It turns out the trait is a mutation that evolved in regions of the world where malaria was a major problem and cause of death. People who carry the sickle cell anemia trait, you're actually somewhat immunized from the most debilitating parts of malaria. So it was what we call a selective pressure. And that means that I have genetic ancestry in sub-Saharan Africa, where malaria is just really prevalent. We took some 23andMe tests, so I am curious what my results are going to be.
And you really don't know.
What I'm assuming then is like 80% African ancestry.
And when you look at, the possibility of doing genetic testing, it can't actually tell you anything about exactly where your family members are from. It can just tell you what pools of DNA your DNA correlates with.
You ready?
Yeah.
Lee looks at the results.
What the Well, this is mine. This is Christoph's.
His DNA test shows he's over 40% European.
What? I'm gonna call my mom.
Lee makes a call to his mom on the phone.
Hello, my love.
I'm looking at my 23andMe results. Why am I half white? I don't even know who I am anymore. 40%? It only says 53% sub-Saharan African. Do you know? That's barely half. Where did all this white come from?
My mother. And probably from daddy, too.
Mom, the math's not adding up. All right, I love you. I'll talk to you later.
I love you too, sweetie.
Okay, bye.
But Lee, you just told us that there's a difference between race and genetic ancestry. So you're not 40% white. You share 40% of your DNA with people who are European.
With white people.
But it gets to the point, like, just because your DNA shows like a bunch of European, it doesn't change the way that society is going to treat you.
Right, exactly. I don't even know if am I mixed race? Like,
and if you are, what proportion of African Americans
are mixed race? Probably a good majority of us, right? Which kind of makes like race so comical, because obviously my genetic and thus medical picture should be way more nuanced than like a black reference population.
The ideal would be for everyone to have some kind of profile like this, and then that is like your more accurate picture.
What you were just describing is kind of the future of medicine that geneticists are working toward right now. I'm gonna go talk to this geneticist who works at Columbia. He's running a research program called the All of Us program, and they want to genetically sequence 1 million people from all over the United States so that we can move closer to precision medicine.
Words appear on a doormat. Finding precision in medicine. Lee is with Dr. David Goldstein.
I know over the last decade we've seen these, tremendous advancements in the way we understand genetic ancestry. Is that more useful to medical professionals or to the field of medicine than race?
When we're thinking about genetics in the clinic, we don't care where they're from. We care what's sitting in that individual's genome, not where their ancestors came from geographically. I think the best way to think of race in medicine is as a proxy for other things, and a lousy proxy at that.
We came across this story about hepatitis C and how, there were different outcomes in white patients versus black patients. 70 million people worldwide are infected with hepatitis C, a bloodborne virus that causes liver infection. Practitioners were seeing that patients of European ancestry recovered more easily from infection than patients of African ancestry. However, a study found that DNA, not geographic ancestry, better explained why.
One particular part of the genome had a dramatic impact on who was cured and who wasn't. Some people have the good response gene variant, and some people have the bad response gene variant.
It was thought that black patients didn't respond well to the treatment, but upon further examination of the genome, it was discovered that 23 to 55% of black patients did in fact carry the good response gene variants, meaning they would have responded well to the treatment. But because physicians were making treatment decisions based on correlations with geographic ancestry, instead of looking at each individual patient's gene variants, Black patients were missing out on treatment. The reason why race was a bad proxy was because it's not impossible to have the gene as a Black person. It's just less likely than, your white or your Asian counterparts.
And so what it tells you is that you want to look at the individual.
I mean, this explains how folks could be misdiagnosed or just miss out, in this case, on treatment entirely because we used race as a proxy and we just thought, oh no, Black folks don't respond well to this treatment.
We don't want to be making important treatment decisions based on weak correlations with geographic ancestry or race when we can do way better. There are not even that many examples in the first place where geographic ancestry really makes a difference, and the reason is that we're all darn near the same. There's, of course, a few little places in the genome where we differ. Sometimes the reasons are because there have been different patterns of exposure to infectious diseases in different parts of the world.
Like sickle cell and malaria.
Like sickle cell and malaria.
Can we get rid of race in medicine?
I do have sympathy for the perspective that we should consider that. I don't think that it would be the best way to practice medicine right now. The best way to practice medicine is to not consider it unless you need to. And I will keep going back to the hepatitis C example.
Love that example.
Let's say that we weren't permitted to consider race. The observation then would not have been made that individuals of different geographic ancestries respond differently.
Lee takes a seat in his apartment.
Race may have come from thinking about skin color, but the implications mean so much more than that. My skin color determines how I'm perceived, and that in turn affects my health. So from day one, it's been really difficult for me to wrap my head around this question because it seems like using a metric as vague as race can carry with it a lot of incorrect assumptions. However, there are some correlations with genetic ancestry that seem to be helpful. So I've realized that we need to support efforts that will allow us to remove the use of race as a proxy for how we administer treatment to folks or how we determine if someone's healthy.
In response to a movement largely led by medical students, some hospitals and universities are removing certain race adjustments.
We need to find solutions that fix inequities and not use race as a best guess. A few weeks after we wrapped this episode, the NFL pledged to stop using race norming as a part of how they were evaluating brain injury claims, meaning that players like Kevin Henry will likely be reevaluated under a new testing protocol that won't involve race. It's still unclear what that method will be and what effect it will have on future brain injury claims.
Outtakes from this episode's shoot.
This is best episode, act 1, take 1, take 2, marker.
Did you say?
Best episode?
Damn.
They make hand shadow shapes on the screen.
This is mildly abnormal. I need to call a doctor.
Vox Media Studios. YouTube Originals.